What we're going to be talking about in today's lesson is the concept of nominations and kind of looking at how the president becomes the nominee for each of their respective parties. So when we look at a nomination is a party's official endorsement of a candidate for office. So really what you're trying to do is you're trying to figure out who is the individual that's going to be able to run and be kind of the face of the party during that election time period. Success in those elections is generally based upon having money, media attention, and momentum. So the idea behind this is that you really do have to have this broad base of support to be able to have access to a lot of money in order to be able to run. Because as we've seen in recent elections, it takes quite a bit of money in order to be able to run a successful campaign. So when we look at, say, the 2012 election, both Mitt Romney and Barack Obama spent over $1 billion apiece in that race for the presidency. In 2008, Obama once again spent over $1 billion in that race to try and become president. So a lot of money is really needed. Media attention is really needed because you do have to establish yourself as a front runner for the party. And the only way that you're going to be able to do that is by getting a lot of media attention and being able to show people kind of who you are and what you're about. Just like we talked about when we talked about Congress, the idea of being an incumbent is a major advantage. Part of that incumbency idea is that you have name recognition and people know who you are, and people have the ability to kind of, when they sit down and look at a ballot, they see your name and they're more likely to vote for you just because they know your name. Same kind of concept goes right around here, is the idea that people have to be able to know who you are in order to be able to vote for you. And then momentum. You've got to get the momentum at the right time. When you watch different elections, you see candidates kind of flame out at times during the primary races, which is something we're going to talk about here in a second. And that's because they're unable to get momentum at the right time, and then things come up, and they bite them in the butt. They say something stupid. Some old news comes out that kind of hampers their ability to run. So you got to get that momentum at the same time. The manipulation of these elements is known as a campaign strategy, which is something that we're going to talk about in later lessons. The goal of the nomination process is to win the support of the majority of delegates at the National Party Convention. And we previously talked about that National Party Convention when we talked about parties. So when we look at the early convention history, remember we talked about that it revolves around this idea of party bosses. And party bosses were the leaders of the parties, and the way that they were able to kind of get people in line is through that idea of patronage. It was the you scratch your back, or you scratch my back, I scratch your back concept of politics. And the idea behind it is if you promise to pass legislation and things like that that are going to benefit me when you're in office, then I'll make sure that you end up the nominee. So these bosses really controlled who the delegates were for each state and who people could vote for. All candidates were chosen through the implementation of patronage, like we just talked about. A move to the primary system helped to take away the power of the party bosses and put the power of nominations in the hands of the citizens. A move to the party system gained further support after the 1968 Democratic Party Convention resulted in riots as people wanted to openly protest the Vietnam War. So when they showed up to be able to protest this, they were denied access into the National Convention, and the people who were denied access freaked out and began to riot outside of the convention area. A move to the party system gained further support, like we said after that. The McGovern-Fraser Commission helped to make the choosing of delegates much more fair, balanced, and representative of the actual electorate. So this was what was put together to be able to try and push the country into the primary system rather than allowing the party bosses to select the candidates. Delegates are awarded based upon primary races in each state through the use of caucuses and the use of primaries, which we'll look at here in just a moment. The only delegates that can vote however they want to are known as superdelegates. Superdelegates are political elites, generally congressional members or national committee members who can vote for whoever they want. At one point in time, the convention actually provided a lot of drama. You didn't know who the nominee was going to be, you didn't know who the nominee was going to be, so you had multiple people show up that had the potential of being the nominees. And there were actually times on the convention floor where you would have these open votes that would take place in order to be able to determine who the nominee for president was going to be. But because now we have the primary race, and the primary races are pretty much used as a way to kind of weed out insufficient candidates, that as those things kind of went on, they went away, and by the time you get to the convention, you've only got one candidate left. All right. The National Convention does help set up what we refer to as the party platform. And the party platform is just the statement of beliefs, the policy statements, the goal statements, and things like that, that the party wants to be able to achieve while they have power of the government. So, how exactly do you be able to weed that down until you get to one candidate? Mainly what you do is it's through the system of caucuses and primaries. And these are used to determine who the nominee for office will be. In a caucus system, voters show up at a fixed time and attend an open meeting where citizens openly discuss their candidates' preferences. The meetings generally last between 1 and 2 hours, and because of that time commitment, caucuses have a lower turnout than primaries. And the way that this works is you show up into a big room and people actually debate who they feel is the best candidate for office. And as they debate who they think is the best candidate for office, what they do is they physically move themselves around the room into areas that are designated for those individuals to be able to go to in order to be able to support them. So you would have a corner for one person and a corner for another and a corner for another. And you actually physically move yourself into those corners to be able to demonstrate who you feel is the best candidate. Now, if you leave before that is over, your vote doesn't count. So you actually have to be there for the entire duration of the caucus in order for that to work. Now, like we said, there's very few people who actually show up to these things, which is a big negative for the caucuses because it's not representative of the people of the state, really. It also tends to over-exaggerate how many men are there. And the reason that that's the case is because largely still within our society, because of the time commitment here, that women are the ones that actually stay at home in order to be able to watch the children while the men go participate in the caucuses. All right. The big thing with the Iowa caucus, which is the first caucus of the year, is it sets a standard for those who are going to get media attention. It's that first one every single year and really provides some early front-runner status for the people who are running for office. So when we look at primaries, there are a variety of primaries that one can take part in. Some are more that you actually take part in them, some are more kind of thought process ideas. Open primaries allow anyone, regardless of party, to take part in a vote for a candidate. Now, even within open primaries, you may only select from one political party. So it's not one of those things to where you can go through and just kind of select anybody who you want a la carte. You do have to select a party that you're going to vote for when you get there, and then you can vote in that party. A closed primary restricts the voter to voting for the party that they are registered for. So, within Florida, we have a closed primary system. So if you're registered as a Republican, you must only vote for Republicans. And when you register as a Democrat, you must only vote for Democrats. And generally, they're going to have those primaries at different days in order to ensure that. Other types of primaries include direct primaries. These are elections in which a party's candidates for public office is nominated by direct vote of the people. Invisible primaries. These are the first phase of the presidential nomination process where candidates attempt to gain front-runner status and raise money. So this isn't one that you actually go vote in, but this is the idea of them trying to fight for media attention, trying to vote for the early favor of the voting public, and trying to ensure that they have a legitimate shot of running. Then there's something we refer to as blanket primaries. Blanket primaries are elections where voters may pick one candidate for each office without regard to party lines. Then we have non-preferential primaries, and these are where voters choose delegates who are not bound to vote for the winning primary candidate. For the vast majority of the time, though, what we have is preferential primaries, and these are where voters choose delegates who are bound to vote for the winning party primary candidate by law. And then you have presidential primaries. And these are elections held in individual states to determine the preference of the voters and to allocate the number of delegates to the party's national convention. And really, open primaries, closed primaries, and things like that all fall underneath that idea of the presidential primary. Now, when we look at delegates can be awarded through a winner-take-all system. And that's a system in which if you win the election, you get all of the delegates, or through a proportional representation system. And the idea is to get the most delegates. And if you get the most delegates throughout these primary and caucus races, then you really are going to get the nomination. and like we said, really, as people go through this system and they realize that they're going to lose, they realize that there's no legitimate shot for them to be able to win, they generally drop out of the election during their primary race, and they drop out until there's only one left. But it can be a winner-take-all system, it can be a proportional system, and really how those delegates are awarded varies based upon the party, and it varies based upon the state. So it's one of those things to where as you look at how this works, we're not going to go into the minutia of what states do what and things like that. Just realize that it varies based upon party and it varies based upon state. So when we look at the elimination of candidates, most of the delegates from the Democratic and Republican national conventions are selected in primaries and caucuses. In today's system, 2/3 of all delegates are chosen within 6 weeks of the Iowa caucus. One of the major events in which lots and lots and lots of people are chosen, or lots of delegates are chosen, is called Super Tuesday. And Super Tuesday, you've generally got around 10 states, maybe a little bit more, that all participate in having their primaries on the same day, and you get tons and tons and tons of delegates that are put out all at the same time. What generally happens here is it's a major washout for a lot of the different candidates that are in office. The reason why you have so many states go at the same time or so early is a result of something we refer to as front-loading. Front-loading is the process of moving up a primary in the calendar so as to be more influential. Because you've got to think about it. If you're the state that's 50 out of 50, pretty much everybody else has made their decision at that point, and you've got a pretty strong indication of as to who the nominee is going to be. So most states try and push themselves up as early in the process as they possibly can in order to be able to have a greater influence on who the nominee is going to be. The primaries work, like we keep saying, as an elimination system in order to pare down the nominees down to one candidate for the Republican and Democratic Party. So what are some of the major issues that exist within this system? 1, Iowa and New Hampshire are said to get too much of an advantage in setting the momentum for candidates. They are tiny states that when you look at the general election, they generally have very little to do with who is going to win because of the low number of electoral votes that they have and the really small populations that they have compared to the rest of the country. So it's said that they have too much of an advantage in setting who the candidates are going to be. It's also really hard for prominent politicians to take part because it really is a full-time job to be able to run in these primary races. It's not like the general election where you only have to go to a few states in order to be able to try and influence the election. You really have to be active in a huge number of states in order to be able to have any chance of being able to win that primary race. It's said that money plays too big a role in the caucuses and primaries. That you're not looking at, really good candidates for office. You're looking at those candidates who have a lot of money and who have the ability to influence the things that are going on. There's also the idea that participation in primaries and caucuses is low and underrepresented. That you have way too many times where the people just are not showing up. The turnout races for primaries and caucuses is pretty close, if not lower, to what midterm election rates are. So when you've got that idea, there are very, very few people who are showing up that are choosing who the candidate for president is going to be. And it's also said that the system gives too much power to the media because they are the ones that really kind of get to set who these front runners are. So how do you fix those weaknesses? There are proposals to deal with the issues with the primary system, including holding a national primary. This would enlist all voters to vote in a primary election at the same time. This could theoretically cut down on the large amount of candidate travel and would stop early voting states from controlling the agenda of candidates. There's also the idea of holding regional primaries, and this would allow for each time zone or region of the country to vote at the same time.